All right, welcome to another episode of the WP Crowd. Today's going to be a good one. We've kind of talked about this before, but kind of wanted to dive into a little bit more. We're talking about plugins today, when you should build a plugin and when you should just use a plugin. But before we do that, let me do some introductions, starting with Chris.
Are you doing the introduction or am I? Does that mean I'm doing it?
Yeah, you can introduce yourself, man.
All right, fine. I'm Chris Flanagan. I am a developer for FlowPress. Do a lot of back-end development, though they've thrown me into a lot of front-end work lately. I've built a lot of plugins that are on the repo, and yeah, I live in Florida.
Cool. Carl?
Sweet. I'm Carl Alexander. I guess I'm a PHP developer. I mainly write on my website, carlalexander.ca. I write heavy technical articles, mostly aimed at the WordPress crowd, but also PHP in general.
You guess you're a PHP developer? Like, I was pretty convinced you were a Perl developer for a second.
Thank God. I'm not that old.
The first language I learned was Perl because I wanted to learn programming, and there was a big yellow Perl programming for dummies at Books A Million. And it was the first one I saw. I was like, all right, I'll pick up that. And so, yeah, the first thing I ever read and learned was Perl, and it was a nightmare. But, yeah.
I would not want to do it.
Logo writer, if you know
What's that.
Logo writer.
Logo writer.
Yeah, it's like this weird Apple programming. It was like this little turtle. You could draw and program it. That in like fourth grade or something like that. That's where I started.
All right. Rerailing this thing. Today, we're talking about plugins. So the main question that we want to answer today is, we're talking about some use cases when it would be good to use a plugin versus just get a plugin from the repo or maybe even purchase a plugin. So the main reason we're talking about it is because sometimes, we're all developers here. And there are definitely times where, as much as I love building a new plugin out or, love building something new, when I have a client or I have a kind of a need for something, I'll just pull something off the shelf. So, Chris, you do, you've been doing a bunch of freelance work. When do you find where's that line? Like, okay, here's where I'm going to stop and I'm just going to pull something off the shelf, or that line where it's like, okay, now I'm just going to build something custom?
It's really about two things, honestly. It's like, if I use a plugin, is it going to affect performance because it's got way more features going on than I need? Or is it overkill, just in general? Like, do I really only need one little bit of functionality? I have a good example. I was working on something recently where I needed sessions, and I wasn't sure if I was going to use cookies or PHP sessions. I was looking into what WordPress offered, and I found a great article by Pippin where he was showing that they had taken the sessions plugin that someone built and wrapped it inside of EDD, like the code in there, so that it went with the EDD download. And I thought that was pretty cool. So then I went out to check out that sessions thing, see if I wanted to wrap it in the plugin I was building. And I realized it was just way more functionality than I needed. All I really needed was one little session tracking thing going on. So I built it myself because it didn't take much time. And I guess that's the other thing to look at, is how much time are you going to invest in building a plugin for this client when you could solve it really quickly with something simple from the repo.
You want me to take over, Roy?
I mean, I could rant forever, but I figured I'd stop it.
I mean, I'm in more of a unique, I guess, not necessarily unique, but my position has always been, when I worked for agencies, I worked a lot with enterprise clients, and the little consulting that I do now is for kind of legacy or large scale WordPress installations that have been going on for a long time. And the big trade-off to me has always been how much work, because because Chris brings a good point, right? Like in the present, how much time am I going to spend developing this thing versus just coding my own plugin? But what I've learned maintaining these large sites or these clients for a long time is that the tail end of the lifetime of the site also matters. And a plugin that might be developed or right now might not be in 2 years. And then you're kind of stuck with this if you've built around it versus if you built your own solution. And you end up, in my experience, again, it depends really, like I'm more of in an enterprise scenario, you end up spending way more time trying to massage these kind of plugins to work and maintain them in the long run than you would have saved just coding them at the beginning. So I've always been much more on the code yourself side of things because of that, because the only plugins that I'm willing to use is something like Yoast SEO, like something very focused that does a very specific job and that doesn't really kind of mess with the whole WordPress thing. But otherwise I've been burned way more often than not in the long term around it.
I mean, I think it depends. So like with I'm obviously also very familiar with enterprise work, but I find that sometimes even in enterprise, we use other plugins specifically so we don't have to put the time in to keep on maintaining our own code, right? So as soon as you build a plugin, and here's kind of the biggest trade-off that's out there. As soon as you build a plugin for a client for yourself, you are now responsible, your client's now responsible for updating that plugin and making sure it's up to date. While if you download a plugin or use let's say a popular plugin, if there is one available, that does everything you need, then now the responsibility of maintaining and updating is now not on your plate anymore. So you actually save money and time in the long run because you're not updating it.
I actually kind of disagree with that because updating can break your site. Like I work with sites where like updating a plugin actually can break a site because again, they've been around for a long time. Like in enterprise, you might end up maintaining them for a long time. So you don't know what's going to break, especially with new major versions and things like that. So you do end up having to maintain them too. So it's like, I don't feel it's like always that clear of a trade-off.
I think it's also trying to keep your list slim when it comes to plugins. Like if you are going to turn a site over to a client to manage all their content, stuff like that, there's going to be some good plugins out there that are well maintained, stay updated, and so forth, that can give them the power they need and a beautiful interface that's been worked on by dozens of people. Like I'm not going to build a shopping cart for a client. I'm going to install WooCommerce. They will always be updated as long as WordPress is being updated. I mean, they're part of the whole system now. And like Caldera Forms, I know Josh. I know he's going to keep that system going and updated. I guess it also comes down to what's your strategy for seeing a plugin's reputation and making the decision, are they a good plugin? Are they going to stay maintained? That's where we kind of have an edge in all of this because we know a lot of the developers out there that are making these plugins, and we know which ones we can trust and which ones we can't.
I find it it's interesting you bring up WooCommerce. I was just thinking about it in my head when you were talking before, where WooCommerce is a plugin that definitely has a lot of features that a lot of times I don't need. And this is kind of, again, this is where this line that I get drawn, or I draw myself is. But I hate dealing with things like PayPal's API. So the trade-off for me is I'd rather install WooCommerce so it has, like I could build a cart system probably pretty easily, maybe not as robust as WooCommerce's, but I could build something that's a cart-like system. I don't want to deal with taxation or taxes and PayPal integration and things like that. So all the other stuff WooCommerce has that probably bloats it up, I'll kind of, it's kind of a double-edged sword, but I kind of just deal with it. I'm like, I'll accept the fact that I don't need half of it because it does one thing that's really going to take me too long or I don't want to code at all. And I feel like sometimes I just install plugins because of that. Like there's this one thing that it does really well And from a development point of view, it's actually very complex, or complex enough where it kind of makes me draw the line. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to use it because it's complex enough for me to not want to build this out anymore. Like, I'd rather just install this plugin.
Comes with budget too. I mean, if you're getting a client and the budget's $1,000 for an e-commerce site, it's like, okay, well, you're going to use WooCommerce and you're going to use this gateway and you got to buy this addition add-on, and that's what I'm going to build for you. Now, if they're like, I want here's $15,000 for this cool custom cart that does exactly what I want it to, then hell yeah, I'll gladly build it out and build the APIs and whatever else. But you gotta think about your time involved there too. So, that's a major factor.
Yeah, I mean, a big solution like EDD or WooCommerce is not really realistic to build out, even for me. Like, but even then, like, I don't know about you guys, but like forums, like forum plugins, like I don't think I've not been burned.
I've never seen a forum plugin that stays updated. That's the problem. Forum, like
BuddyPress. I've never used any forum plugins before. So
BuddyPress too was like a mess. Yeah, BuddyPress was the mess. But I was thinking BBPress, and I forget which one I used before. But they're heavy, and most of the time they don't do what the client wants. So you end up customizing them, and then updating them can be painful. I don't know. I mean, I don't have any experience with WooCommerce, but I wouldn't want to build a commerce platform. Like when I was back in agency, like we had looked at Magento. That was like before WooCommerce got really, really huge. Like now we'd probably look at WooCommerce, but back then Magento was the kind of thing. But yeah, I wouldn't want, e-commerce is very complicated. Like commerce platforms, like you definitely don't want to build that yourself, but I'm talking mostly smaller things. Be careful.
Yeah, I mean, there's clearly a line that gets drawn, right? Like, I'm working on a website right now, helping someone out, and they have a plugin installed, and I didn't install it. I kind of came into the project, but they have a plugin installed for CPTs. Like, they have a post type creator plugin, and I'm like, why do you have this? This is an unnecessary plugin. And the main part of that whole thing was they have a plugin to create a custom post type. I brought it down locally, and like the whole website gets borked because I don't have it. Like I don't have it set up. So there's definitely plugins out there that, there's definitely a line where it's like, okay, no, definitely just going to build something out for this. And then it gets to the more complex stuff like WooCommerce where, it's just, no, I'm not going to build this, but you might build out additions to it. I know, Chris, you've done additions to WooCommerce before, like add-ons yourself. I think that's kind of where the next line gets drawn is, all right, now I'm using WooCommerce, I'm using X plugin. Do I go and build an addition to it, or do I go, grab one of their add-ons and just use that instead? And I think that's...
Go ahead, Roy.
I think that's just general, like when you're thinking about a project in general, like high level, when you're first starting out, that's something you kind of have to consider. Like sometimes that's even the main question I asked earlier was whether or not to build a plugin. Sometimes the question is, do you do both? Do you use a plugin and then build a custom plugin to kind of modify it and stuff like that?
Yeah, like with Woo. This whole topic's definitely more granular than you would think it is from the surface. I mean, WooCommerce and a lot of plugins provide a whole huge array of hooks that you can use, documentation on how to extend it, such as the REST API. It's really like I've become a specialist in WooCommerce because I built so many e-commerce sites and built so many little add-ons for it that I needed. So WooCommerce is almost like its own platform where you're thinking, do I buy plugins or do I build my own? I mean, it goes to a whole nother level there. So I mean that again, it's all about time management. It's about how much do you trust the person supplying and the developers, the whole reputation of the thing. A lot of people dive into WordPress development or building WordPress out for clients by just searching the repo for everything they need and installing the first thing that pops up. And that's where big problems tend to happen, especially when you take over one of those sites.
Yeah, I don't have that much experience with that, but it's just, it's just being careful, thinking long picture. Well, I mean, it's human nature to think like, oh, it's right now. Like this site won't be in my life in 2 years or something like that. And next thing you know, that site is in your life in 2 years. And that decision to make a quick decision to install this plugin, which worked well at the time, had like unforeseen ramifications. But it's always a play-by-play. I think WooCommerce is like the best example of when you definitely want to use a plugin. Nobody really wants to. If you want to build e-commerce, you definitely don't understand how complex e-commerce is, because you definitely wouldn't want to build an e-commerce platform. It's very, very complicated. But on the other hand, for a lot of the smaller stuff, you could probably get away with not using it. And I know like a good example, even with Automatic, a good example of one that's like fallen through the cracks that we haven't heard anymore is like they have a plugin called Editorial Flow, I think, which helps like editors kind of manage the process of publishing a post, which is super useful when you have like large editorial teams. And I think it hasn't been updated in a long time. And it's just, there's bugs, there's things, and you want things to work and be fixed, and then they're not, because the developer is kind of fallen off the face of the earth, you know, and you kind of depend on it. And now you're stuck with it.
I kind of want to go back to what you said earlier, Carl, which is when you have your own plugin, and again, more importantly, when you're using someone else's plugin and you do an update, there's a potential that it'll break your system. I think this is something we think about a lot as developers, like, you know, again, maintenance of a plugin, if you're going to create it, I think is where the responsibility of updating a plugin is different depending if you install a plugin that's already in existence or you go and build your own. You said that, you know, when you update a plugin, it can break your system. Don't you think on some level, and I know this is not super related, but don't you think on some level you should be continuously building out your core? Like, because the responsibility of, let's say, a plugin or plugins, right, are now off of my shoulders as an enterprise level developer, shouldn't I then focus on the actual core platform so updates don't break it? And obviously, you know, if you're enterprise level, you have, you know, X staging environments before it even gets to production. So it's not like most enterprise level are going to be like, hey, we updated in production without testing it and it broke everything. No, most enterprise level are going to test that. But because the responsibility is now shifted, okay, I don't have to update WooCommerce. Automatic and their team are going to handle it. I'm going to focus on making sure my core app is actually, you know, not going to get broken from anything.
I mean, I think this varies from experience to experience. I was in an agency working for enterprise clients. And what would happen is that it's all nice and good. We'll keep on top of the updates and stuff like that. But that actually costs them money. And they're like, oh, well, we want this new feature. We have this budget. And we're like, well, do you want to use like half that budget to make sure that we can keep WordPress up to date? And then they're like, no, we really kind of just want this new feature instead. And what would end up happening is that we would go many, many, many months to something. I've had sites that have 2 years without updates, even to core WordPress, just because the client did not want to spend money on it. And you end up with this baggage, right? Yeah, the plugins might be discontinued. The updates might break. Some BC things might happen. again, it really depends. But in that context, there's no amount of staging servers that are going to save us. Like I can figure it out on my dev environment that it's going to break because my site broke. And that's really out of my control because, again, the financial constraints of the client push them towards the features and not the maintenance, which might be a bit different for you because you're at Disney. So like, but you still have, there's still an internal client process, right? So,
Yeah.
so it's still a cost that they have to incur, and they're not going to be happy about incurring it, even though you're the developer and you're like, you really need to do this. They don't.
Well, we spend a lot of time focusing on our updates. Like, we would never have hopefully would never have a website that's, a WordPress site that's not been updated in 2 years. That sounds so ridiculous.
Yeah, it is ridiculous, but it's really hard when the client just doesn't want to pay for it.
Well, also, what about, all the, it's you see it in other industries too. When I worked at the hospital here as their web person, they required you to Internet Explorer 6 because all of their software and features and stuff were known to work on IE6. And I mean, that was a disaster for me as the web guy, but they couldn't upgrade people's browsers because it would break all their legacy code. And you got to see that as the same thing in WordPress. If you have a big enterprise level WordPress site that was built on 3.0, updating WordPress could kill a ton of these custom features that they had built. So they know that staying with this version is going to last and not break, but an update could kill it. And it'd take forever to even figure out what it killed because it'd be so complex, so much stuff in there. That it's like Carl said, it's budget. Do they want to pay to have it updated to the latest version, or do they want you just to patch the little security bits that have popped up here and there? And a lot of times, a company's looking at the budget like, just here's $500 now, patch that little piece that's broken, and then later here's another. They don't look at I could spend 10 grand now and get the latest version and everything's pretty.
You've actually nailed it really well, and you actually made me think of something. There was a post recently. I'm gonna mess up his name. Alain Schlera. He's in Switzerland, I think. He's in Europe, but he had basically like a roadmap, a hypothetical roadmap for WordPress, because what would get us to the next 50%? And he was arguing that enterprise was a big thing. And one thing that you see in more robust frameworks and Linux, as well as the concept of LTS, which is called long-term support, which is there's a version that will be maintained with security fixes and everything for a long time. And enterprise clients love that because they can now project into a 5-year time frame for their app, and they know that at least security updates and things like that will be done and they'll be safe. And he argued that it would be good if WordPress would go to that. I would argue as well, having done a lot of enterprise work, that it works a lot better for them, because it's really hard for them to be like, well, you need to spend this much to upgrade the site. And it's hard for me to, like, even if you want to be subtle about it, like I've done a lot of kind of under the, you pass it under changes, like you try to pass it under in the budget or whatever, that you'll do some changes, but it's really hard to justify even to your boss, your project manager, hey, I'm going to break the entire site and we're going to repair it as part of this project, just to try to maintain it so that the client doesn't know necessarily, but we've done the work, because it's just, sometimes it's a lot of work. It's just, the backlog happens so quickly that you don't really realize it. So the LTS would be really good to have, like this kind of 5-year window that we're safe. And then you can really plan with the client the next version with them. That would be really good.
That's interesting. I never thought about WordPress taking that path of like Linux or any OS, really, security updates to the big version release for this many years, but not all the little updates they send out. So instead of, like right now, if you want the latest security updates, you have to update your entire WordPress platform to the latest version. it'd be awesome if there was a way to just stay at one version, upgrade just the security as needed. That would be really cool if WordPress went that route. You know what? They probably, like that fella in Switzerland or wherever said, that's probably what they need to do.
Yeah.
Huh. Never thought about that. That's really cool, Carl.
I don't know, like I agree, but at the same time, WordPress itself is I've rarely seen WordPress itself cause issues like updates to WordPress. I'll agree that plugin updates can definitely wreak havoc on a system, but I've rarely, because of WordPress's like commitment to being backwards compatible and so like adamant about it, I've rarely seen WordPress itself become the issue of
It's plugins plus WordPress.
Mm-hmm.
So example, right now I'm still on version 1 of the REST API with the person that I'm working with, and now that they've merged all the content endpoints in, when I update it, it just breaks. So I have to fix that now. Like I have to migrate everything to the next version of the REST API, but we actually cannot update. Like we can't update at this point. So if I was with an enterprise client and he was like, well, that's too bad, we're just going to stay here forever now, I'd be stuck at 3.5 or 3.6, whichever we're at right now. And then that'd be it, right? So, and then you'd lose on all the security updates. So I think that's, to me, is problematic for sure. And that's why a lot of the frameworks now do it. Like Symfony does it, Laravel does it. Like they all do a kind of LTS release because it's just impossible for enterprise clients to work in the time frame that WordPress works, especially now that they're faster with the. If anything, it was easier before when they weren't regular about their updates.
But like, at what point, like, does WordPress itself keep on developing, and then you're just frozen? LTS is like a version whatever that's like based on.
It's a branch, and you merge the security fixes in it.
Okay, that's an interesting concept. I haven't thought about that. That is a good one.
I think I honestly think that it's one of the key aspects of with enterprise. Like even when back then when I was pitching Symfony as a tool, just the fact that they had something called an LTS, they were the first one. Laravel just started doing LTS versions as well. That was a big selling point because again, a lot of enterprise clients are just not they want to stay secure. Obviously, nobody wants to get hacked or anything like that, but they don't want to have to deal with all the changes and all that stuff on a 6 months to actually more like 4-month window now. So it's just unreasonable for them to work that way.
Yeah, cool. Well, sorry to kind of cut it short. I'm gonna have to bring this up in another podcast, but we're kind of out of time for today. So thank you guys for joining me. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to subscribe down below somewhere. And definitely check us out at wpcrowd.com, and hope to see you guys next week.
Cheers.
Thanks, Roy.
Yeah, see you guys later.